there, guys, and welcome to another Factorio Friday Facts discussion number 302, the multiplayer Megapacket. And this one is going to be a lot different. So basically, what's happening is I'm just giving you this short intro to let you know what's happening. But pretty much the entire rest of the video is going to be Affliction discussing the Friday Facts. In fact, due to our schedules not lining up great and a written technical summary not really being able to like a summarize one from him, not being able to really cover this and explain it properly. He just recorded he just recorded discussion on his own of this and sent it to me, and I'm combining it together with this intro. I know it's kind of weird that like someone else is doing it, but this is so technical. I tried reading through it, and most of it just I didn't even begin to understand. So it would literally, if I did, it would literally just be me reading the words and having no understanding of what's actually happening. So I hope you guys don't mind. Next week, hopefully things will line up better and it won't be as technical, so we can actually record together and both of us will have some understanding of it. So I'm going to just end my intro here and let his video take over and explain things. So hopefully you enjoy the guest appearance by him doing the full thing, and I will see you guys in the next video. I'll catch you later.
Hello everyone, welcome to a special edition of Factorio Friday Facts discussion. My name is Affliction Star. I'm filling in for Xterminator today because we had trouble finding a good time to record together, and the fact that this Friday Facts number 302, the multiplayer Megapacket, is extremely technical, and I didn't think that a written summary could really boil it down to the essentials more than this Friday Facts did by itself. So I'll be going through it today, and hopefully next week our schedules line up a lot better and we can record together. So let's give some background on this. The multiplayer Megapacket, when Twinson was working and playing on Catherine of Sky's MMO event last month, he noticed that when the game reached 200 plus people, people would get disconnected every few minutes. Some people wouldn't get disconnected. Others would get disconnected every single time, like Twinson. So he started digging, and after 3 weeks of debugging, testing, and fixing, he finally fixed the issue. I think the fix was deployed yesterday or the day before in version 17.54. But he goes through and says that multiplayer issues are extremely hard to debug because you have to have the right number of people, you have to simulate the network conditions, and all that. And so the short version, because of a bug and an incomplete implementation of what they call the latency state simulation, the client would sometimes end up in a situation where it sends 400 updates in one game tick, and then that overloads the server because the server needs to send those 400 updates to each one of the 200 clients, which saturates the server upload, packet loss, and then just a cascade of re-requested packets, and then the delayed inputs cause more clients to send those packets, and it snowballs and causes everyone to drop. It took a long time to find and fix. So let's dive into the details here. The basics of Factorio multiplayer is you have the game state, which is the source of truth for everyone. If the game state ever differs from the server's game state, then that's what they call a desync, and you get dropped from the game immediately. But they also have something called the latency state, which is what they do to hide the network latency. Because the way the game works, you perform an action as a player. That action goes into the game client. The game client sends it to the network so that it can reach the server. The server sends the update over the network to all game clients, and then it's applied to the game state because the server is the one that's managing what the game state should be. So if you wait for every single action you take to make a round trip from your client to the server and back, you're going to be dealing with a lot of latency. So what they did is they created this latency state. This latency state is just the actions that you took in the order that you took them. And it's intended to account for the total round trip latency time. So this first action, it's already gone through the round trip, so it's getting applied to the game state. This next action here is currently in flight back to you over the network, and it will be the next one to be taken. A3 is going to be the one after that. A4 is currently getting processed by the server, so soon the server will send it out on the network to all the connected clients, and it'll be applied when the client receives it, and so on and so forth. So once you perform the action, it puts the action out onto the network, and it puts it into the latency queue that's on your machine. And what the latency queue does is it simulates, based on what you've done, it simulates what it thinks the game state needs to be. And up till now, the only requirement for it is that it needs to look good enough that when we get the actual actions, not too much is different. So the process on the client side is apply all the input actions of all players to the game state as received from the server, so in the order that you receive them from the server. Delete all the input actions from the latency queue that were applied to the game state. So A1 is removed from this queue, and then A2 is removed from the queue once it's applied to the game state. Delete the current latency state and reset it to what the current game state is. So that's what's going on here. The latency state is your current position, cursor stack, things that are going to be built, things that need to be mined, blah, 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 blah. The game state gets copied over and overwrites everything that was in the previous latency state. Apply all the actions in the latency queue to the latency state. So once, let's say we're processing A2 here. A2 is received from the network, gets applied to the game state. It gets deleted from the latency queue. The latency state is deleted. Game state is copied over to the latency state. And now it needs to apply A3, A4, A5, and A6 because those are still in the latency queue. And then render the game to the player based on the information from the game state and the latency state. So the game state is where we are currently. The latency state is where we think we're going to be. All right? Is that getting complicated? Yeah, it's a little complicated, and it kind of has to be for the game to run as smoothly as it does. And this entire thing, all 5 of these steps, is repeated every tick. So on every tick, we create a latency state. We apply everything in the latency queue to that latency state. No, before that, on every tick, we delete the latency state. We copy over the game state to the latency state. We apply everything that's still in the latency queue to that latency state, and then we render it. And so it's happening 60 times a second if you're running at 60/60. Well, internet connections are unreliable. So internet connections, they can be dropped, packets can be lost, packets can take longer than expected to route from one end to the other, so they need some way to deal with it. The first one is skipped ticks. So if someone has a lag spike and doesn't send all of its input actions, the server won't wait for that client so that it doesn't slow down everyone else's game. It'll tell that one client that had a lag spike, I didn't include your input actions. I'll try to include them in the next tick. And it's so that it doesn't slow the map update for everyone. Their input actions are never ignored, they're only delayed. And the other thing is the round trip latency. The server tries to guess what the round trip delay between the client and server for each client. Every 5 seconds it recalculates. And so it tries to keep a measure of how long that round trip latency is, so that it can have the appropriate length queue. By themselves, they're pretty straightforward. But when they happen together, which is common when you have connection issues, things go haywire. And there are a large number of edge cases. Edge cases, you have your happy path through the code, which is the way you expect it to behave. And then there are the edge cases where certain conditions are met that could cause your code to behave differently. And so something this complicated, I'm not surprised there's a large number of edge cases. So the server and the latency queue need to properly inject a special input action that they call stop movement in the next tick when the client is starting to lag behind the server. And that's to make sure that your character doesn't continue running by itself. So that's some of the network issues that they have here. Now they need to go over entity selection. When you hover over an item, or when you hover over an entity in the game, the entity that you're hovering over is sent to the server. And the reason for that is so that they can reduce the size of the other player actions that need to know what entity you have selected in order to work properly. And the way that it's done, instead of having the absolute position of that entity, instead of having absolute map coordinates, it has a low precision offset to the previous selection. And because a selection is usually very close to the previous selection, like you're not going to have your mouse suddenly teleport from one side of the screen to the other. Your mouse is going to be moving through the screen, and you're going to be hovering over everything in between. The selection is usually very close, so the relative distance is good enough. But this creates two new requirements here. Input actions can never be skipped because the current selection is always relative to the last input action. And they need to be executed in the correct order for the same reason. Those requirements are met for the game state, but not the latency state. So essentially, this is the source of all those bugs, or this is the source of all those disconnects and desyncs that were happening when there were 200 people connected to the MMO server. The latency state didn't account for many of the edge cases that dealt with tick skipping and route trip latency changing. So now we have the Megapacket that they talked about before. The entity selection logic relied on the latency state to decide if it should send a selection changed action. But sometimes the latency state didn't have the correct information. So here's the bug. Step 1, the player has connection issues. This can happen for any number of reasons. It could be network latency. It could be like a spotty connection. It could be a lot of noise on the connection. It could be some router between the client and the server is getting overloaded and just can't process the packets fast enough. It could be drop packets. It could be any number of things. So once the player starts having connection issues, skip ticks and round-trip latency adjustment mechanisms start to kick in. Now, alone, they're fine, but together they start to manifest in all these different edge cases. The latency state queue doesn't account for skip ticks and round-trip latency. This leads to some actions being deleted prematurely or being executed in the wrong order, leading to an incorrect latency state. Remember, these are the two requirements. Actions can never be skipped, and they need to be executed in the correct order. And we need that to make sure that the entity selection change works properly across all of the input actions. The player's connection issues go away, and the game simulates up to 400 ticks in order to catch up to the server again. So while this is happening, the the player who's having the connection issues, they haven't stopped playing. They've still been sending input actions, or they've still been inputting actions to their machine, to the client. It's just the client stored them so that it could simulate the whole thing and catch up to the server. For every tick, a new entity selection change action is generated and prepared to be sent to the server. Remember, this is up to 400 ticks. Then the client sends the server a Megapacket with more than 400 entity selection changes and other actions, shooting state, walking state, etc. Then the server receives 400 input actions, and since it can't skip anything, it tells all the clients to execute those actions and sends them over the network. 400 at a time. These network packets are massive. They started causing where is it? It started saturating the server's upload bandwidth. The saturated upload bandwidth caused packet loss, which caused all the clients, or a lot of the clients, to re-request these gigantic packets. And then those delayed input actions cause more clients to send these mega packets with 400 plus input actions, and it causes the issue to happen all over again. Eventually, some clients could recover. Everyone else got desynced. So in the end, this was all solved by fixing all the edge cases of updating and maintaining the latency queue. And while it took a while, it was the proper fix instead of a hack. So that's credit to Twinsen and for everyone who helped Twinsen in debugging and fixing the issue. It's always better to fix the root cause of a bug than to put a band-aid on it and hope it works. So kudos to you. If that was not clear to anyone, please comment below. I will try to go through and answer as many questions as I can. It was complicated. It took me a few read-throughs of this to figure out exactly what was going on, and I'm still wrapping my head around it. So again, if you have any questions, please comment and I'll try to answer it. And then the other section of this, much shorter, is Clusterio, the gridlock cluster. Those of you who are regulars on Xterminator's channel will remember the Clusterio event that they had last year, where they built a cluster of servers and got up to 60,000 signs per minute. Mangled Pork has a video of the start of last year's event on YouTube. Xterminator has a bunch of videos on it. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. The people who did that event, they're coming together again for another Clusterio event called the Gridlock Cluster. And they want to push the limits even further. So if you want to participate in that, you can check the Reddit post, you can join the Discord server, and let them know that you want to help and ask how you can help. That's it for this week. If you have anything to comment to the devs, post it on the forums, post it on Reddit. And as always, have a good week.